Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a tag video, one of my instant responses, because I was tagged by a new booktuber called Booktime with Elvis. That's Mark over in the Czech Republic, and I saw his video about half an hour ago. So as I mentioned in my tag about tags video, when I'm directly tagged, I like to turn them around as soon as I can, if possible. Still don't really understand why, but I do. So I'll leave the link to Mark's original video, and please go follow him because he's a new booktuber. So this is called a little literary tag, and question 1. Tolkien once said that the cellar door is the most beautiful expression in English. What do you think is the most beautiful word or phrase in English or in any language? Well, my favourite word is flabelliform, which means shaped like a fan and is often used of leaves of plants and trees and stuff. Another word I particularly like is fulgurant, which is sort of sparkling, sort of almost lights up like fire. And, from that one may glean that my favourite letter of the alphabet is the letter F, which it isn't actually, it's the letter C, because I once wrote an experimental short story or flash fiction, which was called C degrees C, and the degrees was as in the degree symbol rather than the word degrees. And it was 101 word sentences, all beginning with the letter C, words beginning with the letter C, and it basically told a cradle to the grave story of a character in 100 words. I don't speak foreign languages. I can read a bit of French, but one of my favourite words is verklempt, which is a Yiddish word meaning sort of overcome with emotion, and I kind of like it for the sound of it more than what it means. But it does also point to my least favourite word in the American language, which is copacetic, because we don't. It's not a word we use in English. I'm sure it's derived originally in America. It's just a word I don't like, and it's sort of bland and jejune and has no real significant meaning that it even needs to exist as a word. And as a concept word, my favourite word is etymology, because I'm obsessed with words, partly as a writer, partly as a reader. I'm one of those readers who will stop, put down the book, and go to my dictionary to look up a word that I'm unfamiliar with in a book I'm reading, and thereby drag myself out of the narrative. But that's a price worth paying as far as I'm concerned. So I do like the word etymology, or the concept etymology, because I do dive into the origins of words, and I particularly like words that have rather decayed from their original meaning, their root meaning, to actually start meaning something that's actually rather different. I also like words that mean two different things that are mutually exclusive, like cleave or fast, things like that. 2. What words in English do you find the most amusing? 2. Steampunk and space opera, because I just don't understand them really. They're not genres I read in. I have read space opera books, sort of unwittingly, and then been told they're space opera. And the word that I don't find this word funny, but I find it funny that I can never pronounce it, and that is phenomenological, or phenomenology. And it's an important word because it's something I reflect on a lot in thinking about the nature of reality and fiction. And indeed I have a current work in progress of a novel which is all about it. So hopefully by the end of that novel I'll be able to pronounce it properly. 3. Have you memorised any poems in full to whip out now and then to impress your friends? If so, which ones? I haven't. I wouldn't have a good enough memory to recall poems word for word. I also don't have any friends in which I would be in a situation where I felt the compunction to do such a thing. Yeah, I don't have many literary friends other than people on BookTube. 4. Who or what do you consider to be an underrated and underappreciated author or book? This is always a hard question, but I'm going to offer David Markson, who died turn of the 21st century. And he's my favourite author. He's the most radical author in terms of fiction, for me anyway. Some of his early works were sort of paid to write gigs, so I don't really include those. I'm talking about his oeuvre of his last 3, 4, 5 novels, I think, something like that. It's hard for me to know just how underappreciated he was or is, but it's more drawn from details of his personal life. He seemed to, he lived in New York. I think he was in a rent-controlled building, but he didn't make much money from writing, and always seemed to have a sort of melancholic tinge about him, maybe related to that, also related to his many health issues. But the saddest thing about it was, and you will need to be familiar with his art, his own writing for this, but he was a massive, prodigious reader, and that informed his writing. And when he died, his because he wasn't appreciated enough, his library was just sort of sold off for to second-hand bookshops. And the thing about Marxon was that he wrote in all of his books. He had arguments with the books as he was reading them, and wrote things in the margins and at the bottom. And that very much informed, as I say, some of his later books that he wrote himself. And so these were not curated properly as a sort of archive. And these books are sort of dispersed all around the world, and you still see someone sort of exclaim, "Oh, I bought a book from a second-hand shop, and it was owned by David Marxon, and he's written this in it." I just find that terribly sad, and in some way I relate that as a commentary on his life. But if there is such a thing as an afterlife, David, you are appreciated in some circles. 5. Which book do you consider to have the best or most memorable beginning? Well, if you're talking in terms of opening lines, for me it's Camus' L'Étranger, Mother Died Today, or Was It Yesterday? But I like to think of openings as a bit more than the opening line. And for me, Don DeLillo is unparalleled, the best writer of opening scenes. So you've got the shot heard around the world, the World Series baseball. Actually, it's not a World Series. I think it's the qualifying round for the World Series baseball in the 1960s between, I can't remember, the Yankees and the Dodgers, when they were both still in, when the Dodgers were still in New York, or it might have been the Giants when they were still in New York. And it's the shot that was heard around the world, which of course sort of sets up, the shot that was heard all around the world was the one that killed JFK, which the book goes on to deal with. But it's such a brilliantly written scene about the atmosphere in the stadium, and as seen through the eyes of a small boy in attendance. It's fantastic. Then there's also the mass Mooney wedding that opens, I think it's Mao 2 by DeLillo. And again, this sort of mass crowd scene. No one does them quite like DeLillo. And the third is his most recent book called The Silence, which isn't a great book, but the opening is fantastic, of a man and a woman. She's a poet, can't remember what his job is, maybe an artist, and they're on a transatlantic flight back from Paris. And it's just describing, he's rigidly watching the screen that sort of plots their flight and what the air temperature is and what speed they're doing and stuff, and his wife is trying to note down in her notebook every single aspect of the holiday that they've just taken, because that's something she does. So they're both sort of completists or obsessives in their own way, and even though nothing is happening that's sort of menacing or threatening, there's such a tension in the way DeLillo writes this very ordinary scene. It's brilliant, and then of course it does prefigure a looming menace. It's just brilliant, and he's fantastic. I will say also that I'm currently doing a buddy read of this, The Recognitions by William Gaddis, and some of the chapter openings in it, not necessarily the first chapter, although that is good as well, but some of the chapter openings are so brilliant. They're so good. So he does it sort of more consistently throughout the book, and quite often the chapters don't quite hold up to that level of how they start in terms of the literariness and the skill and the humour, but this is great. And the other is, I can't remember it in any detail now, but I do remember that Jennifer Egan's A Visit from the Goon Squad and Manhattan Beach, she's also very good at writing opening chapters. So those are the authors that I would offer. 6. Which book title best describes your life? Our Tragic Universe by Scarlett Thomas, and it's It's one of my favourite books, but I recognise it's not for everyone, because it's in some ways it's unreadable, because she's exploring alternatives to Western narrative structures. So that anytime anything happens in the book, it happens off page, because that's the point of what she's, you know, in sort of Eastern and other sort of autochthonic narrative traditions, you know, they're totally different to ours. And it's mainly about people sort of dropping in on other people, having cups of tea and talking and stuff, which just sounds, you know, inane and banal, but there's some very, very profound stuff going on in there about the nature of fiction and reality, and how one relates to the other. But as a title, Our Tragic Universe is kind of how I view, you know, the human condition, really. 7. What was the last book you read that led to a moistening of the eyes? Valeria Luiselli's The Lost Children Archive back in 2019, because my eyes do not moisten very often, but it did with that one. And they almost did with Sophie Ward's Love and Other Thought Experiments as well. There are many times my eyes have moistened in sort of fury at bad books, but let's not go there. 8. When it is time to shuffle off this mortal coil and go to that big library in the sky, what bookish or literary quote would you like engraved on your headstone? Okay, so I have written this down because it's in Latin. Timor mortis conturbat me. The fear of death discomposes me, which is by William Dunbar in his Lament for the Macaris. Fear of death discomposes me, which it does, but that's sort of more in life. You know, I have a mortal terror of death. I have completed, although it's not yet published, a novella about death and dying and the afterlife and things like that, of which I quote this. And the other obvious one is Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, Rage, Rage Against the Dying of the Light by Dylan Thomas, which again is a quote in my book. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. But unfortunately, whether we rage or not, we do all go into the dying of the light. 9. If you wrote a book and didn't want to use your own name, what name would you choose as a suitable pen name? Well, I do write books and my pen name is Mark Nash, so what you don't know is my real name. 10. Many literary characters have sidekicks or henchmen. Who would you choose to be your companion on your life adventures? So there's a book called The Antiquarian by a Peruvian author called Gustavo Faveron Patrial, and it's about two childhood friends, Gustavo and Daniel, and they sort of slightly drift apart as they enter sort of adulthood, and Daniel ends up confessing to stabbing his wife to death, and is put in a sanatorium because he's judged sort of mentally ill criminally insane rather than just criminal. And he gets in touch with his old mate Gustavo, and Gustavo goes above and beyond the call of duty to get to the bottom of what the story is, that, you know, this guy didn't murder his wife, you know, and basically to get him out of this institution. And as I say, that would be the kind of wingman that I think I should like in life. Okay, so thanks to Mark for that tag. I am going to tag 3 people like he did to do this. The first is Kathy Grimm. The second is Hannah at Hannah Reads. Hannah's Books. And the third is Lukács at A Cruel Reader's Thesis. Can never remember his renamed channel. So I hope, guys, that like me, you found this a really sort of challenging and you know, forced you to think kind of tag that you might like to do. Okay, till next time. Thanks very much.